soften your focus and land in this natural cathedral. Bringing your whole self into your body, into your chair, into this earth, into this place to honor Bob. Just a few minutes of silence.
To indulge me for just a moment, because I'm so grateful to be here, and I want to invite you to sing along with me this song that says, gratitude before me, gratitude behind me, gratitude to the left of me, gratitude to the right of me, gratitude above me, gratitude, gratitude within me, gratitude all around me. Let's try it again. Gratitude before me, and this is in Hebron. Gratitude behind me, it's to the left. Gratitude to the left of me, gratitude to the right of me, and you can reach, let's reach. Gratitude above me, gratitude below me, gratitude all around, gratitude all around me. Now, I'm so grateful. 4 times. I'm so grateful. That's 2. I'm so grateful. Now this one changes. I'm so grateful. 4 more. I'm so grateful. Yes, 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 yes. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with ions, which it would be hard to imagine if you knew Bob that you wouldn't be familiar with ions, because I think he was ions' biggest and best advocate, but just in case you weren't, it was founded by the Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was the 6th person to walk on the moon. And he, on the way back from his moonwalk, had the window seat in the space capsule and had an epiphany where he deeply recognized at a noetic level, at a very authoritative, inner, unquestionable level, the interconnectedness of everything, all life on the planet, the stars, the earth, the sun, the moon, and his place in everything. And not only that, saw an intelligence or a light or a divinity shining through everything. He realized that this was not a result of random processes, this universe and this earth, but that there was an order, that there was a meaning to it. He also looked at the planet and saw that when you view the planet from space, there are no boundaries between countries. Those are made-up constructions, and right now, today, I know that all of you know how important that message is. There are no borders, there are no others, and that is what inspired Bob Blackstone to be such a tremendous supporter of the Institute of Noetic Sciences for the last 25 years. I think he had the longest running community group of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, SAC Ions, Sacramento. Some of you are here, and I know some of them are stuck on the freeway and almost here, so we're gonna have to give them a big hug when they get here. Bob was dedicated to the idea of a world without borders. He was someone who built bridges between generations, between ethnicities, between races, between classes, between churches and science. I knew him personally for the last 17 years, and Bob was one of my biggest supporters, and he was one of ION's largest advocates, as I said. But that's not where it ends. Bob was just an incredible role model. He was someone who walked his talk in every way. I was kind of a fangirl of Bob. I mean, he marched in Selma with Martin Luther King Jr. He was heavily involved in creating the recycle bins that are outside of every single house right now. But it was also just how he walked through the world and the voice he used. Everybody knows Bob Blackstone's voice. I can't even begin to try to emulate it, but it was like James Earl Jones in a white man's body, just a beautiful, resonant voice that carried the message. So I heard from one of my favorite teachers who also passed away, Angelus Arian, that there are two things we must do when someone passes. The first is to ask ourselves, what do I need to integrate from that person's life? And the second is, what do I need to carry on? And I'm asking here for our organization and each one of us, what do we need to integrate from Bob's life, and what do we need to carry on? So a couple of answers to that. What I think IONS wants to integrate is the absolute passion and enthusiasm for this mission to bring people together, to shift the paradigm and shift the worldview that people hold as a collective, so that it becomes very hard for us to treat other people in ways that we wouldn't treat ourselves and our families. It becomes very hard for us to engage in behaviors that harm others while benefiting ourselves. He had a singleness of purpose, and if he believed in something, he did not stop until he felt like it was being addressed, and we'd like to do that too. He had a dedication to justice, to truth, to beauty, and to joy and fun and laughter, and that's one thing that we'd like to integrate as well, and I would like to as well. He also had, I know that all of you know this, an incredible humility, and until you hear his bio, you wouldn't have any idea the magnitude of what Bob had achieved. He would call himself Basic Bob, and that was his name in his quartet too, because he was the bass, right? So Basic Bob, though, to him meant, I'm nothing special, it's what I'm trying to make happen for other people that's special, and I just admired that so much. Now, what do I need to carry on? What do we need to carry on? Commitment to a higher truth. Carry forward that commitment to a higher truth. And in the place we are in our society right now, especially in the United States, it is more important than ever that we all stay committed to what we know is true and to not fall back asleep and to stay awake as we continue to fight for justice and work toward it. We remain committed to community, and Bob had a place in his heart for community, only second to the place in his heart for his family. Thank you so much for allowing us the honor of having you here and having Bob with us and being able to have this ceremony to your family. But his love of community was just right after that, and he believed in the power of bringing people together, and especially bringing different people together to find common ground. And he believed in inclusivity. And I want to let you guys know we are starting the Bob Blackstone Memorial Fund, and that will be something that people in the world can donate to carry forward Bob's legacy, to bring scholarships for inclusivity of young people and people of color to come to IONS and to come to our conferences and community. I'm not asking you to contribute, but the world will contribute. So it is my great pleasure to now introduce another person I admire to the bottom of my soul, and I just feel so grateful to even be able to have encountered her once in this life, and I get to have her more than that all the time, and I just appreciate it. Louisa Tish is a chief in the Yoruba tradition, She is a leader of the African diaspora, the spiritual traditions of the Africa that have gone all over the world. And she is a tremendous human being who has supported Ions with her spirit, her soul, her time, and her energy, and was a good friend of Bob. And Bob loved her so much. One of his favorite things was having Tish come up to Sacramento. So I welcome Tish to come up.
Okay.
By saying Alafia. When I say Alafia, your response is Sha Alafia ni. Alafia. Sha Alafia ni. Now, what I have said in the Yoruba language is may you have good health and be at peace with your neighbor. And you said, may the same shine back on you. Okay? So I always ask people to just take a moment and see if you can imagine what it would feel like to have good health on every level, and also to be at peace with all of your neighbors. I know that I would not wrinkle my face quite as much if those things were really operating in our lives. I am so blessed to be able to be here to serve as a priestess in my tradition in honor of Bob Blackstone, who we will address and call an illustrious ancestor. His name will be placed on the ancestor shrine at my home, and in the fall, when we do the rituals of remembrance, we call the names and invoke the spirits of those who are illustrious ancestors, and his name will be there. I want to do two things out of my tradition. The first is to pour libations. You know, we pour fresh water on the earth. I say, O mi tutu, which is the blessing of fresh water. O na, may the road of life be freshened. Ile tutu, may the power of the earth be freshened. Tutu, obo, egungun, may the spirit of all the ancestors be freshened. Now, I need to know who are the people here in this group who are afraid to sing. Could you please raise your hand? Okay, I haven't exercised. You're about to sing, you know that. So what I want you to do is fill your belly with air, take a deep breath, and say the letter O as you exhale. Now, two more times, I want you to take it all in and fill your belly with your own spirit and say, oh. Now, I want you to remember all the times that somebody told you, shut up, you can't sing, you got it wrong, blah, 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 blah. Take a deep breath. And get over it, okay? This is not a talent show. You ain't got to worry. No, there's no hook. Nobody's going to pull you off stage. I want to acknowledge that the chant I'm about to teach you was taught to me by Iya Odunfonda of Oyotunji Village. We always give credit where credit is due. And her name, Odunfonda, means profound wisdom, profound truth, okay? And I sing this with her permission. This is the chant that we do in my tradition to lift the person's spirit into the land of the ancestors, okay? And your line is, Moyuba,
Moyuba,
Fefeiku,
Fefeiku,
Moyuba,
Moyuba,
Fefeiku.
Fefeiku.
Now you're going to do that 4 times, and as you are doing that, what you're doing with your hands is you are lifting his spirit. You see, Fefe Ku is the one who knows the secret of featherless flight. Okay? And so you are saying, Mo you ba Fefe Ku 4 times, right? And I'm going to sing that's the chorus. I'm going to sing the rest of it and play in between, just so you know. The chant is saying that this one who knows the magic of featherless flight will be greeted with love and respect in the land of the ancestors. Okay? Mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku. Equal, equal, ente lo se yo ba e gun gun. Equal, equal, ente lo se yo ba e gun gun. Mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku. Baban lao, ian lao, ente lo se yo ba e gun gun. Baban lao, ian lao, ente lo se yo ba e gun gun. Mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku. Oh, mommy, oh, mommy, oh. Ente lo se yo ba e gun gun. About children. Oh, mommy, oh, mommy, oh. Your father is received. Ente lo se yo ba e gun gun. Mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku, mo you ba fe fe ku. Multiply. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce our officiant for this memorial for Bob, Matthew Fox, who's also been an important figure in many of our lives. Matthew Fox's history as a pioneering educator is long, from his visionary programs at Mundilian College and Holy Names College, and also at the University of Creation Spirituality. He's now collaborating with a board of creation spirituality leaders to establish the Fox Institute for Creation Spirituality, which offers graduate degrees and certificates based on the principles of creation spirituality and grounded in the wisdom traditions of faith and science. Matthew was a very important person to Bob, who looked up to him tremendously as he carried out a lot of what Bob cared about so much, which was bringing religion and science together and bringing the world's religions together. So please welcome Matthew Fox.
Say hello to Bob. I think he's enjoying himself. already with these three women leaders who have already kicked our celebration off. So our thanks to Michelle and to Cassie, beautiful words and message that you already shared, and of course to our sister Tish. My knowing Bob is probably different from most of yours. I didn't know Bob, first of all, as an IONS leader, or even as a political scientist. I knew Bob as Toddy's brother. It's a very different approach to anything. But I just want to put it out there and be transparent here. So we're gathering together to hear stories, to share stories about Bob. His life, his work, his relationships, his choices, therefore his values. Everything that has been said already is just a wonderful kickoff for all these dimensions. We who are known to him as a circle of his family, friends, his co-workers, and the many, many people who are not physically present, whom he impacted, as was we reminded of everyone who has garbage in this stage. Bob, thank you. It's so fitting that this happened in an IONS context because, as has been pointed out, Bob was such a committed and devoted champion of the spirit and the value system of IONS. He sought a communion between spirituality and science. Bob was a deep thinker and a deep activist. And we learned already he had a deep singing voice as well. And he truly felt that ION's great contribution to our time would be to act out of a solid scientific and spiritual foundation. Bringing the two together was his goal. After all, his father had been a missionary. What we do here today in sharing these stories, this memorial service in Bob's memory, and I love the cover and the program that put out by his family, Celebration of a Life Lived in Love. Wonderful. What we do is a very modest thing in a memorial service. Why am I so sure of that? Because a life, any life, and surely one that ran almost 85 years, as Bob's did, and who was as active as Bob was right up to the end. Every life is a vast, vast caravan of twists and turns and choices and options and invitations and people and organizations and struggles and defeats and triumphs and disappointments and learnings and forgettings and happenstance. Every life is vast. How can we shrink Bob's of 85 years into an hour-and-a-half sermon? So only a few of Bob's caravan will be remembered by us today. A life is also a circle, and we hope to trace and name some of the circle that was Bob's years on this earth. And some of his motives and intentions will surely emerge. But still, much will go unsaid. And we want to honor that. Much will go unsaid. Meister Eckhart says, the soul is ineffable like God is. The soul is ineffable like God is. Each of us is a deep, deep mystery. And a lot of it can never be named, even at a memorial service. If God and the soul are ineffable, surely a person's life is the same. Yet we who are here and who speak and share will try to tell the stories of Bob's life. And that is what the sharing, the heart of a memorial service is all about, sharing stories. Yet a memorial service is not just a gathering of memories and teachings and lessons from another's life. There's also, we really should not forget this, a reminder. A reminder for everyone here that life on this earth, as we become accustomed to it, whether it be joyful or sad or a combination of the two, life as we know it is a limited thing. We are human, therefore we are mortal. We shall all die and go our way, just as Bob has done before us, and many, many ancestors before him. And how appropriate this beautiful ritual that we just sang with Tish about sending the soul on its way to its next incarnation. Therefore, today is not just a moment to gather memories of Bob's journey among us, but also to pause and to ask the obvious question: how are we doing? How is our circle of choices and values and relationships and work progressing? Not knowing how much time we have left, are we using it wisely, joyfully, justly, generously, for the sake of others, for the sake of generations yet to be born? And here we take inspiration from Bob's life. These two elements of memorial service come together because Bob's life was a life of such inspiration. So we thank Bob today, not only for his life, the stories we are sure to hear in a plentiful way, in abundance, very soon from those who knew him, but we also thank him for his death, which is a reminder and a challenge and a charge. Where do we go from here? Our remaining years, our days, our choices, our organizations, our communities. A life is a once and precious thing. Once in 13.8 billion years has there been a Bob Blackstone. One in 13.8 billion years, and one in 2 trillion galaxies has there been a Bob Blackstone. Amen. Or a you, or a you, or a you, or a me. How could we ever take life for granted? How could we ever be bored again? Bob was never bored. It is about the ancestors, those who birthed us and taught us and prepared the way for us, as well as those who will follow after us, children and grandchildren and all. That is exactly what Tish was singing and leading us in just now. Plato said, and I don't quote Plato very often, but he did say this one thing that struck me the other day, that to philosophize, one must face death. That to philosophize, one must face death. There is much death we are coming face to face with today, including the death of our planet as we know it, the death of our ecosystems and oceans and myriad species as we know them and share the earth with them. And of course, as always, the death of our friends and family members. And even today, we're facing the death of democracy. In this context, surely a new birth of wisdom is possible and necessary. For philosophy means a love of wisdom. Can we, in this context, and in the context of remembering Bob and all he stood for, light a fire that ignites a love of wisdom once again? Not just knowledge, but wisdom. Was Bob a lover and activist on behalf of wisdom? Was Bob a philosopher, therefore, as well as an activist? I think the speakers today will share stories that address that question. And I think the answer is yes. Finally, in opening the ceremony, along with our previous leaders, I want to cite from an ancient Indo-American poet. He put the question that we're talking about this way thousands of years ago, this Mesoamerican poet. Where do we go? Where do we go? Are we dead beyond, or do we yet live? Will there be existence again? Will the joy of the giver of life be there again? Do flowers go to the region of the dead? In the beyond, are we dead, or do we still live? Where is the source of light, since that which gives life hides itself? That which gives life hides itself.
Bob got all the hype from the family. So I'll work to be heard. Many, many thanks beyond expression to Cassie, to Matt, to Ions, and in fact to all of you who have come together to celebrate Bob's life. I know many of you have known him and been close to him for years, but I've probably known him the longest, so have been asked to tell you a few things about his early life. I'm one of Bob's two sisters, the middle child, as Bob was born first. Then 3 years later, I arrived, with Toddy following 3 years after. Our parents were missionaries in China, so all three of us kids were born and raised there. Many of our early years were during the Second World War, and it was certainly an unusual childhood. But along with the bombings and often serious danger, there were many good things as well. Our parents are both musical. Dad had a gorgeous voice, you won't be surprised because of Bob. And Mother was a really good pianist, and together they gave concerts that we got to hear them prepare for almost every night. Dad always included spirituals in his programs, and Bob loved to sing them as well. In fact, we kids actually got to perform on occasion. Mother homeschooled us, which turned out fortunate for us, as otherwise we would have been in Shanghai when it was occupied by the advancing Japanese. As the war got closer to us in Hunan, Dad was asked by General Chenault to be a civilian chaplain for the Flying Tigers, which Dad agreed to since he was no longer able to do the work with the Chinese he'd been doing in the countryside. This turned out also to be extremely fortunate for our family, as we were evacuated several times over the years ahead of the advancing enemy. Of all the things that happened during those years, I've decided to tell you one story from the era I think tells us a lot about Bob. It was April 7th, 1944, 3 days before his 11th birthday, close to midnight. Toddy, Bobby, and I were all asleep when we were awakened by a really loud noise that sounded like a plane right overhead. As we hurried downstairs, neighbors came rushing in to warn us to put out the lights, as an enemy bomber was getting ready to bomb us. Just as the folks started to do that, Bob spoke up and told them it was an American plane, a B-25 bomber, not Japanese. The adults were surprised and hesitated, but he assured them he was absolutely positive. So now they rushed to the field nearby, it was just a dirt field, and lined up all the lamps they could find to tell the pilot to help him land this large plane on a very short field, which he did perfectly. Sure enough, it was an American B-25 bomber. Captain Carl Laval and his 5 crew members had no idea where they were. They feared it was occupied China, and they would be captured and imprisoned. So we're relieved to hear Dad's voice, in English of course, welcoming them, and Bobby's congratulating them for stopping in time on that small field. Dad and Bobby brought them home, and they spent part of the rest of the night taking turns talking to Bobby since he had saved their lives. They'd been on a bombing mission and had been blown way off course by sudden monsoon-type winds. There was no electricity in rural China at that time, so after nightfall, they were flying blind and on fumes alone. Bobby was able to explain to them that his flying tiger buddies had encouraged him to learn to distinguish all the U.S. planes visually, by sight, by which he had done. But he decided he wanted to be able to distinguish them by sound as well, which he then learned also. Thus, his, and I love this, as Captain Laval labeled Bobby's skill, radar ears with antenna recognize friend or foe. Isn't that cool? Isn't that amazing? You know, imagine saving 6 lives by learning more than was asked. And that's kind of the motto. I keep thinking of Bob and how he lived his life. And it was making things better, trying to do, in whatever examples we have, pathfinding, making things better, you know. So from then on, he was Big Brother Bob to me, no longer Bobby. Our family came home to the U.S. in 45, then returned a year after later to Canton, 49 to Hong Kong. We 3 all went to KG5, a British school, while there. In 1950, Bob and I came back without the parents to a boarding school in Illinois, so Toddy and my parents stayed there. We came back to this new culture. Bob would be a senior and I would be a sophomore. For someone who knew none of the mores and habits of American teens, I was a fish out of water. It was awful, awful. But I survived because of my brother. He was a pitcher on the varsity baseball team, one of the soloists in the advanced choir, an excellent student and very popular. So I was able to slide by on his coattails, or at least it seemed to me. Once again, my hero. Bob graduated and went on to UCLA, graduated from there, went to Princeton Seminary. After seminary, he started at Temple University as chaplain. And in the meantime, he'd come back to California, met the love of his life, Carolyn, and they were married. So his life was moving on. When the arrival of their first child, Eric, and they were busy restoring an old home in the downtown area to provide housing for others as well as themselves. He was also expanding his efforts on the campus, developing a coffee house for students who wanted to gather and talk, which eventually became an honored tradition. So he was really pretty busy. But he decided to visit the Princeton campus and pursue plans for a master's degree, you know, something else to do. While walking across the campus, a friend, Ted Catchell, ran up and told him Dr. Martin Luther King was speaking right then in the chapel. So they raced over to hear him. It was packed, so they had to stand in the back to listen. And he gave this really moving speech that Bob was electrified by. He came home and he talked to Carolyn and said, I've got to go. I've got to march. And he did. So in '63, he was there to hear the famous I Have a Dream speech. He was right there with the other ministers and clergy. Then, 2 years later, now Karen had come along. So he had a growing family and a busy life, but he felt once again he needed to go and help, and he joined the Selma March and heard in Montgomery Dr. Martin Luther King's speech there. Third time, in '67, when Dr. Martin Luther King was marching to the United Nations, he again planning with Carolyn and figuring out how to manage all this, went up and joined that march also. So when I think back, I think there were lots of things that he did that were pretty wonderful. But those stood out as things that made him pretty unique and something that we could really learn from. I've been really grateful to have Bob in my life. Bob and Carolyn made such an absolutely wonderfully close team. I feared that when she passed, he would soon follow her. However, he used to tell me about how much it meant to him that he felt useful and respected here at IONS. So I think he had almost made it. I think he had extra years because of you, Cassie, and the Noetic Science, all of you IONS people. So I thank you. I thank you.
Dad shared a little bit of the height with me here, so I'll adjust that momentarily. Thank you, Margie. Beautiful. I'm Eric. I'm Bob's son, and will be forever. As my son and I, Trace, walked back to the dorms last night, we were treated to a beautiful waxing crescent moon, topped by Venus as they moved towards the horizon. It meant that the Earth, Moon, and Sun were nearly aligned. That served as another reminder that we are aligned in this sacred place and in this sacred purpose. Dad had an innate talent for recognizing and resonating to sacred spaces and moments. He was drawn to those who lived in reverence of the source of creation, which permeates us and makes us one. And he drew others to discover the sacred within themselves. Dad was a pathfinder, and our many family adventures, sailing, both where we lived on the East Coast and the West after moving to California, tied into a past life regression Dad experienced, where he experienced both life and death at sea, and had a vision of Mom waiting for him on the distant shore. Continuity that's hard to compete with. Dad also built bridges between people, having a unique ability to see alignments and connections as he interacted with his friends, and fostering relationships with others in his network of cultural creatives, often to a synergistic effect. Mom called him her balloon man. His affirming vision lifted us up and carried us through adventurous plans and journeys that few others would have attempted. One example is the uprooting of the entire family, which was happily ensconced in Redondo Beach, to a move to Boise, Idaho, which I continually heard as Iowa because I had never heard of a place called Idaho before. But we learned to trust in Dad's vision and found a place where we could put down deeper roots than ever before, as is evidenced by the growing family, and now a great-grandchild has joined us, just 1 month old. In Idaho, Dad worked in academia and in service of those in need with the Interfaith Services Bureau. He and Mom started a daycare business, which rapidly grew, and worked to provide their young clients with an empowering and supportive environment. Shortly prior to my being married to my lovely wife, Cindy, who will celebrate 35 years in a couple of days.
Wow.
The family returned to California, with Dad finding meaningful employment with the state, and Mom returning to her beloved classroom teaching the second grade. Then they began their heart work. They discovered the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and as Dad told us many times, felt they had found home. They co-founded the community group Sac Ions in Sacramento and devoted themselves to sharing Edgar Mitchell's vision and further developing their own spirituality while learning how to scientifically and rigorously study consciousness. For more than 25 years, Dad committed himself to this community group and later as a member of the board of IONS. Of all the great adventures and accomplishments Dad had in his life, this is what he considered his mission and his legacy. The wonderful people he encountered here were his family. And as evidenced by this wonderful celebration today, loved him dearly. The greatest validation of my life, he often said, is the respect and value given to me by some of the greatest minds in the study of consciousness in the world today. He truly had found a home that utilized all his vast and unique training and experience to the fullest and allowed him to reach his full potential. Many thanks.
I'm Karen, his daughter, and I have written a poem in memory of my father. My father, wisdom seeker, convergence of cultures like the current swirling where the river meets the crashing waves. Perspective can only be gained by witnessing history firsthand, enduring the bombing raids while in China as mascot of the Flying Tigers, standing up and walking the path towards civil rights in Selma and Washington, D.C. Solid like a chunk of rock, resisting the wearing away of water and rain, unwavering in your beliefs, always based on proof of science or experience. You surrounded yourself with great thinkers who were pushing the boundaries of what was known. To watch the spark ignite between two souls who solved all the world's problems till the wee hours of night. Mom called you her balloon man, with insightful ideas that carried her and many others to heights. You were the fiery stardust that swirls through the universe, carrying light, heat, life, and information. It was worth taking the longer road with you to stop in a mystical redwood grove and commune with the ancient spirits of trees. Circling high above, an eagle on outstretched wings, exulting in freedom of flight. You were always the life of the party, sharing a sip of your ancestral brew with loved ones and friends, ready to sing harmony with guitars or with your beloved quartet. Such joy in living and in sharing times with people. Feisty fire of self-assured debate. The dinner table was always a place for political analysis, often mixed with some theology. Don't show up without an opinion you're ready to argue to the end. Multifaceted sunbeams glinting off the undulating sea waters like glimpses of your knowledge, strength, and wisdom. And there is depth below the waters. How can we carry on? Your love for the environment, your passion for raising consciousness, your devotion to globalism, your undying hope for the critical changes making our world sustainable, equitable, and peaceful. Each person you come in contact with matters, as you always told me. Our molecules, once having touched, would always react to each other, regardless of physical distance. Well, new experiment. Do our molecules react beyond the physical plane, into the afterlife? You are remembered by so many with your deep voice and comments that cut through to the core of the issues. I wonder if your knowledge has increased 20-fold as you gain a new perspective. I know that living without Mom was practically unbearable. She was present in our thoughts and conversations every day. My heart rejoices for your reunion, as it breaks with my loneliness for you both. Know that our love will follow you beyond all realms, and that we shall meet again.
Beautiful.
Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you?
Sing it.
It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. You say I took the name in vain, though I don't even know the name. But if I did, well, really, what's it to ya? There's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter what you've heard, the holy or the broken. Hallelujah. Oh, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Oh, I did my best, it wasn't much. Couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I've told the truth, I didn't come to fool ya. And even though it all went wrong, I stand before the Lord in song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. Sing it. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
delicious. Thank you. Amen. That was one of Bob's favorite songs. I last saw Bob, fittingly enough, at the IONS conference in Oakland, California at the Marriott Center last fall. I knew he had just emerged from a hospital stay. And I was surprised and very pleased to see him looking pretty good and emitting healthy energy in his gait and full of his usual curiosity and pack of questions. When his sister told us about the airmen that he helped save and how they took turns all night talking to him, I'm sure he was asking them questions all night long. David Corton and I had just finished our public dialogue to a pretty large group, and we hung around to chat with folks. And I was very unprepared for what happened next. People started going away to their next sessions, and Bob came up to me. And he followed me out of the large hall, and he was talking to me for so lengthy a time that pretty soon the halls at the conference center were completely empty. Everyone was off to the next workshop. But Bob and I were alone in the empty corridors of that vast place. Two things occurred to me at the time. Number one, I was not going to get to the talk that I had marked on my program that seemed real interesting to me to attend. And number two, I was not going to shake Bob off. This guy wanted to talk. He was really persistent. And I think that theme has already come up tonight, that when Bob got his sights on something, he stuck to it. I did not know why he was so persistent. But in retrospect, I do. Today I know. His conversation was about how much my work had affected his life. How original blessing undid almost all of his theology training at Princeton Seminary.
Yes, honey.
How the four paths of creation spirituality gave a name to his life's work, his battles, whether in Sacramento State Houses or on the streets or the People's Marches in Washington. How creation spirituality grounded his political science degree in a spirituality he could believe in and could live out, and that connected his science and his deepest spiritual yearnings. Bob was a seeker, wanting to connect his Christian roots to today's science. Of course, his father was a minister and missionary, and he wanted to approach ethical issues from ecology to women's rights to racial injustice. For him, the concept of original blessing and creation spirituality were very important. Creation, after all, is what we all have in common. And as already been alluded to, he found a lot of spiritual juice in nature, in the sky, in the forest, in all of it. At this meeting, he told me he had just finished my recent book on Thomas Merton. I really couldn't believe it, because here the fellow was in a hospital, was struggling for his life, but he's still reading. And he loved what Merton said about inner space and outer space. Now, Thomas Merton, who was a Catholic monk of considerable stature, he died in 1968. Frankly, he was assassinated the same year that Robert Kennedy and King were assassinated. I've proven that now. I've proven it. He was one of the few intellectuals in the 1960s, Merton was, who questioned the trip to the moon. Now, this is something IONS needs to hear. Listen what he wrote back then, Thomas Merton. Even if we can fly, so what? There are flying ants. Even if man flies all over the universe, he's still nothing but a flying ant until we recover a human center and a human spirit in the depth of our own being. What can we gain by sailing to the moon if we are not able to cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves?
Well,
This is the most important of all voyages of discovery. And without it, all the rest are not only useless, but disastrous. Amen. I think that passage in my book on Merton leapt out right into Bob's consciousness and his ion consciousness, because Edgar Mitchell was about the same thing. What if we as a country, we as a species, had heeded Merton 60 years ago and had put as much effort into developing human consciousness, dealing with violence, and that which we carry with us wherever we go, as he proposed. If we had done more of a balance, reaching for the inner space as well as for outer space. That's what ION stands for, and that's what Bob was about. Even though I was enjoying my talk with Bob, I confess that emotionally I was a bit annoyed by Bob's persistence. I'm just being honest. I often get nice feedback after a talk, and sometimes not so nice. But whether you're getting praise or punishment, usually one moves on. And I've learned over the years not to take either too seriously, the praise or the criticism. But Bob was not moving on. He hung around, and he hung on me, telling me lots of stories of his life and work and the influence of my work on his. Even when I went to the bathroom, he was there. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't shake him. It is only in retrospect, after he died a few months later, that I figured out what our encounter in Marriott, Oakland was all about. He was thanking me. He was thanking me. But more than that, he was recounting his own life and work and journey, and in the process thanking all of us and life itself for the journey. We are all here today to say, you are welcome to Bob, and to say thank you back to Bob also. In John's Gospel, there is the line, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, scholars tell us Jesus didn't say those things. Those were put into his mouth after he died by the community who was so turned on by him. So those are the words of the cosmic Christ, not of the historical Jesus.
Gotcha.
But nevertheless, they're very powerful words because, as the poet brought up and others today, the question about what's next is on most people's minds, one time or another. So what is this thing called resurrection? St. Thomas Aquinas, a brilliant theologian from the 13th century, who, by the way, spent his whole life bringing science into religion. And at that time, like today, the fundamentalists were freaked out by that. They felt all the answers were already there. He said, Aquinas says there are two resurrections. The first is waking up in this lifetime. Waking up in this lifetime. And if you've done that, you don't have to worry about the second.
Oh, well.
Those of us who knew and worked with Bob can say, I think, that Bob was one who woke up in this lifetime. First, he was awakened by truth. This is why he asked so many questions. This is why he spent so much time studying science, theology, political science, cosmology. Why he was so committed to ions, where the scientific quest for truth meant so much to him. He resonated, and he told me this last conversation we had, with Aquinas' observation, which I often repeated. Revelation comes in two volumes, nature and the Bible. Science studies nature. Science, therefore, is a source of revelation. Duh. Bob liked to call himself a connector. A connector. He liked to connect science and revelation, the mystics and the prophets. Secondly, Bob was awakened to justice and to injustice. That will come up continually, the news of injustice. Kabir, the great Indian mystic, says, "You've been asleep for millions and millions of years. Why not wake up this morning?" I think Bob was kind of living that question his whole life. And this is why he was an activist. Or in other language, he was both a mystic and a prophet, a lover and one who interferes with injustice. And he told me how these categories of mysticism and prophecy were so important to him. Hafiz, the Sufi mystic, says, "It is a naive person who thinks we're not engaged in a fierce battle. For I see and hear brave foot soldiers all around me going mad, falling on the ground in excruciating pain. But you could become a victorious horse person and carry your heart through this world like a life-giving sun, S-U-N, but only if you and God become sweet lovers." I think Bob was on that kind of a journey. His spirit life, his developing of his powers of love, expressed already so many ways in this sharing, certainly with his family and all, that was as much a part of his life as was his warriorhood to stand up to injustice. Growing up in China, as we learned, Bob became attuned as a boy to what it meant to be a minority, an outsider, to be of another race, another culture, speaking another language. And he never forgot that lesson when he saw the injustice of racism and oppression of minorities in his own country. The truth of suffering caused by injustice, racism, anthropocentrism was very real to him. It fed his passion for racial, economic, and eco-justice, especially. He seeded trees. He planted many a redwood in addition to take on forces that are killing the planet as we know it. Now, the heart of my talking about Bob's resurrection, his awakening to truth and to justice, is this short sentence from Thomas Aquinas also. He says, "The proper objects of the heart are truth and justice." That is so interesting. Taking truth and justice out of just the head into the heart. That is the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Well,
And that is what Bob was about his whole life. That's why he was a lover of wisdom, a true philosopher and activist who acted out of that love. Bob's passion and constancy speak to this. Bob had a good heart, a deep heart, a passionate heart, a truthful heart, a musical heart, a justice-seeking heart. There, truth and justice flourished. Or as Meister Eckhart puts it, compassion is where peace and justice kiss. Compassion is where peace and justice kiss. In Bob's heart, they kissed, and they kissed often. Now, I introduced our gathering today with some thoughts about death. It is good to contextualize our lives in the presence of death at a memorial service that remembers a life well lived. Many other reflections on death by our ancestors, its meaning, its mystery, the question, what if anything comes afterwards? So let us consider a few brief thoughts from different traditions. Black Elk said this: "The white man will never be alone. Let him be just and deal kindly with my people, for the dead are not powerless. The dead are not powerless." Dead, did I say? There is no death, only a change of world.
well,
That is from indigenous wisdom. Meister Eckhart said, at death, life dies, but being goes on. The new science tells us that the new cosmology, a supernova lives and dies, but it resurrects because it spreads its seeds to other generations of new life. If this is true of a supernova, surely it's true of us too, that we too live, die, and resurrect. Hildegard of Bingen said, no warmth is lost in the universe. No warmth is lost in the universe. And Einstein said, no energy is lost in the universe. And I say, no beauty is lost in the universe. And Hafiz, the Sufi mystic, says, if your life was contained in God's cup, how would you be so brave? If your life was not contained in God's cup, how would you be so brave and laugh and dance in the face of death? Your existence, my dear, oh love, my dear, has been sealed and marked too sacred by the beloved to ever end. Indeed, God has written 1,000 poems all over your heart that say life, life, life is far too sacred to ever end. And finally, another Mesoamerican poet from 2,000 years ago, whose name I cannot pronounce. I'll make a shot at it. Nezahualcóyotl, whatever. He says this, thus we are mortal. Men through and through, women through and through. We all will have to go away. We all will have to die on earth. Within myself, I discover this. Indeed, I shall never die. Indeed, I shall never disappear. There where there is no death, there where death is overcome, let me go there. My flowers will not come to an end. My songs will not come to an end. I, the singer, raise them up. They are scattered. They are bestowed. And now, in the additional stories and sharings that we carry of Bob, and which we shared now, we will be taking in Bob's flowers in songs that he scattered and bestowed in his lifetime. They will be recalled for us by our storytellers. So let us listen joyfully and heartfully with gratitude for the stories that we're about to hear.
We're on the home stretch now. We're going to listen to a few people, and then I'd like to, after we complete this part of it, I want to let you guys know that in the garden, which is beyond the community center, there is a pergola and a table that is dedicated to Bob and Carolyn Blackstone, and has been since Carolyn passed. So please feel free to go to the garden and experience that before we go in for lunch at 1:15, 1:20. So now it's my pleasure to say that, first of all, Bob had a lot of conversations with Edgar Mitchell, who really enjoyed Bob. Edgar just liked him a lot. And also the staff members at IONS and the other members of IONS loved Bob. Katya Peterson had many, many, many conversations with Bob. Dean Radin, so many of our people. And the board of directors really loved Bob. So everyone here was so appreciative of what he had to bring, not just love, but appreciation. So I'd like to ask the chair of our board of directors, Claudia Wells, to come, followed by our CEO, Claire Lachance. The two of them really made this whole thing possible, so thank them for that. And here's Claudia. Cassie made this whole thing possible. Beautiful inspiration this morning, thank you. This crystal was given to me by our beautiful Bob Blackstone
when I joined the IONS board 2 years ago. It was one of a group of crystals that came from IONS life director, Betsy Gordon, who gave one to each management team and board member as a reminder of their connection between meetings, to each other and to Earth. After they were distributed, a few remained, and Bob became the natural custodian of the remaining crystals. And his job was to give them to the new board members when they joined. This is mine, and this is the last one. He told me that it was supercharged from sitting for the last 3 years on his and Carolyn's altar, waiting for its appointment with me. I'll never forget the way he handed it to me with the grace and reverence that was Bob. It's been sitting on my altar now for 2 years, and at the board meeting yesterday, it sat on the table in front of the empty chair, which Bob would normally occupy. I know this is a celebration. I'm crying because I'm happy. We opened the meeting with heartfelt remembrances of our elder statesmen as the crystal was passed to each person who spoke. How he will never be replaced. How much he gave us, how much he taught us in word, in deed, and most profoundly through the quality of his beingness. How much we felt him there still with us. At Bob's last board meeting in March, we were discussing a noetic practice of systematically and collectively calling on trusted sources, those energies outside of time and space, including IONS legacy holders who have transitioned, that can help guide IONS to its highest expression in the world. We didn't know then how soon we would gain this new and vital, beloved, trusted source. As I was preparing to come here earlier this week and rummaging through papers, a small lined page ripped from a notebook fell in front of me. I recognized my handwriting, but I hadn't seen this particular page in a long time. When I read it, I felt Bob wanted me to see it so I could share it with you as a message to you. It said, "You will only ever have 2 choices, love or fear. Always choose love and never let fear turn you against your playful heart." There was a quote from Willis Harman, words he shared with a mutual friend, Marilyn King, that said, "Don't worry, Gaia is winning." And at the bottom of the page, in quotes, it said, "Levity and brevity, Bob, levity and brevity." Those were some important bits of wisdom that I wanted to integrate into my life. When I'm tempted to mourn the loss of Bob, I remember the quote by Rabindranath Tagore, who said, "Death is not the extinguishing of the light. It is the turning off of the lamp because the dawn has come."
Wow.
Thank you, Bob, our trusted source. We love you, and we will continue to call on you and depend on you and carry on with you as we always have. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And it's just a blessing to be able to offer a few comments. Is everybody hearing me okay? Yeah. It's a joy. And I have so much to say about Bob. And I want to take it on the levity a little bit, because I think that's the spirit I'm going to hold with him. And for me, Bob had, and it dawned on me in reflecting on Bob that some of you know this story. It was just about 5 years ago, I went to my first IONS conference. And I went not knowing anyone from IONS, just being a fan of the work. And I went as a regular, average donor. And it was Bob's speech. I remember, I'll sign up for that luncheon. There was a special luncheon. It was, of course, a fundraising luncheon. And I just go to it thinking I'm going to just have a good time, learn more about IONS. It was Bob's speech. I will never forget that. It was Bob's speech that really inspired me, and somehow out of the ether I became a circle member. And I think that ended up leading to these sequence of events that changed my own life. That because of being a circle member, I went to the circle weekend. I got to meet Katia more and Cassie. Somehow I ended up on the board a year later. And then after that, I'm the CEO. I mean, it's crazy, but it really was Bob. Bob was so passionate. And I have that, I think it was Matthew, in your comments about invitation. I felt that he actually, in that, gave me an invitation. Now, what I want to say to especially the family, to Margie and Toddy, Eric and Karen and the grandchildren, is that this is not so much about remembrance, but he is going to continue with us. I have no doubt about that. The board meeting yesterday, as Claudia was saying so beautifully, we were sitting there just feeling this enormity of peace and inspiration. And Diane, who was there, also talking about the peacefulness in the room. And I thought about it, it was an extraordinary board meeting. And then I felt guilty because at the last board meeting, we actually asked Bob to do the reflection and I had to cut him short. And I thought, oh my gosh, I looked right across at where he was sitting, where another board member, Calvin, was yesterday, and I thought, oh my gosh, I should have never cut Bob short. But it was that way. What I take away from Bob in that is that he was so consistent in his message. He loved to talk. I just took great humor with Matthew, you sharing about what happened at the Oakland conference. And I remember Bob telling me about that, how happy he was. He had so much time with you. And I thought, wow. But what I learned, because I tend to be, I would tend to edit myself down or be more reserved or polite, is to say, no, be a little more bold. That's what I want to take from Bob. So I really want the family to know Bob will always be on the board of IONS. He will be our trusted source. Since we are I'll share that when we did go through the trusted source process, which was, tapping into those trusted sources, this is about 6-7 weeks ago, and Bob had recently passed. I actually had him, he was one that I called on, but he actually, in what I was feeling, he pulled away because he says, I still have too many opinions. And he felt like it was, and this is true, that he was just he couldn't be that trusted source quite yet. Right. But yesterday he seemed to be more comfortable with that. So, and I'm not making that up, that is really true. But I really want the family to know that. Bob will always be the head of the community groups. Sorry, Toddy. He will always be on our board. And for me, I think going back to that invitation, I think what I pull from this is this invitation, what you took from Bob in your life. What invitation did it give you? Because it sure changed my life back in July of 2013. So with deep gratitude and much love to dear Bob, and I'll never forget him. Thank you.
I'm one of Bob's grandchildren, and one of his dear friends, Belvy Rooks, is greatly saddened that she couldn't be here with us, but in her stead she sent a poem written by her husband, Didon. This is titled, I Am. I am old and wise as the night. I am as beautiful as a bird in flight. I am the moon and the sea. I am the robin and the bee. I am the soil and the tree. I am the lion and the gazelle.
I am heaven, and I am hell. I am the ring, and I am the bell. I am the joy, the tear, I am the brave, and I am the fear. I am the blistering desert, I am the freezing snow. I am the cringing coward, and the gentle hero. I am the aged, and I am the young. I am the weak, and I am the strong. I am the smile, and I am the frown. I am the pauper, and I am the crown. I am the wrong, and I am the right. I am the day, and I am the night. I am now, and I am never. I am yesterday, and I am forever. I am the bitter, and I am the sweet. I live on the hill, and I live on the street. I am the top, and I am the bottom. I am Martin, Hitler, Gandhi, and Saddam. I am black, yellow, brown, red, and white. I love, hate, cry, laugh, and fight. All the universe is reflected in me. I am all that is, that was, and ever will be. When I lose, it is the lesson that I win. Judging others is my sin. Just wanted to share that with you in her stead because she and Didon were both dear friends of my papa. Thank you.
I'm Tony's husband, Laurie.
It's on, just pull it up a little bit to your mouth.
Oh, okay. Hey, there you are. I had the privilege and honor with Toddy to be able to bring him to the last board meeting. Eric couldn't do it. Eric and Karen have been good children, taking good care of him, as the whole family has. And equally, he took good care of them. And there are two things that happened. As ever, he was always very thoughtful. And at one moment, there was one evening, I truly thought we were going to lose him. While here. He was very frail, but he insisted on being here. It was very important to him. And one thing he said was, as always, I'm home. That was always when he arrived. And he said, it's good to be loved. And it wasn't just about Toddy and me being there. It was about being here at Ions. It was about family. And the other thing that he said to me was, I've never had a brother, and now I have one. He was a fine man, and it was a privilege to know him.
Might Swami Beyondananda say a few words in the spirit of levity?
I'm sure I could.
Okay.
I'm totally not prepared. I didn't bring my turban today. I got my off-duty sign, so I'm terribly surprised that I've been asked to say a few words. In being with this gathering with my wife Trudy, we really only met Bob once or twice, and we stayed with him in Sacramento when we did the Sacramento Ions thing. And because I've always been a lover of aircraft, we had such an amazing conversation about his childhood and about the flying tigers and so on. And as I sat here, I was thinking about my brother-in-law, who is also a great lover of aircraft, and I'm going to have a lot to tell him, particularly the B-25 story today. I don't know that I have anything levitous to share. I think the spirit of levity and love is here, and you know, I'm at a loss for adding anything to what's been said. There's just so much love in this space, And it's inspiring to hear about somebody who lived his life with such purpose. And particularly in these times, the new word to describe our political condition, situation.
Yeah.
Being our current situation. We draw on inspiration every place we can. And in these stories of resurrection and the stories of the Spirit is alive, Gaia is alive, love is alive. It's alive in every one of the imaginal cells that's in this place. And even though most of what we read on the news is about the deconstructing caterpillar, the butterfly is alive and well, and it's happening. And I want to thank every individual here for being an imaginal cell that's bringing forth something new, something loving, something positive, and something truly evolutionary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. You know the refrain, right? Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Now some new thought lyrics. Mine eyes have seen the coming of an age that is to be. With from every limitation I shall know that I am free. For the age is rich in promise, and my soul has eyes to see. God's truth is marching on. Let's sing the refrain. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Yes, his truth is marching on. I hear some harmony coming out. My soul has seen a beauty of a race that's sorrow-free, an age of faith and justice, truth and love and liberty. And I sing of love's great triumph in this time of jubilee. God's truth is marching on. Let's stand and sing the refrain together. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Oh, glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. God's truth is marching on. Oh, glory, glory, hallelujah. Yes, glory, glory, hallelujah. You know how it goes. Glory, glory, hallelujah. God's truth is marching on. So Ben, I need you to take me to a little bit. If ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. In the spirit of Brother Blackstone. Because he enjoyed the spiritual, amen? And it's our call and our charge. And we want to keep that tempo like that, like that. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. You know how it goes? Turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking and keep on talking, marching on the freedom's land. One more time. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Find some harmony, turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on to freedom's land. Ain't gonna let my past, ain't gonna let my past turn me around. Yes, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let my past turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on to freedom. How about let's not let situations, I'm not gonna let situations turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let this situation turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on walking, marching on the freedom's land. See that again? I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on to freedom's land. Give a big hand clap on behalf of our brother Bob Blackstone. Hallelujah!
All right, folks, lunch is available for all in the community center. We'll see you at lunch in the community center. Thank you.
Oh, brother, if I never see you again. Gonna meet you at the judgment day. Moses went down into the Egypt land. He told old Pharaoh that the good Lord sitting on his heavenly throne said, let my people go. Good Lord, let my people go. Oh, well, they're climbing up the mountain, children. Oh, Lord, I didn't come here for to stay. Oh, brother, if I never more see you again, gonna meet you at the judgment day. Daniel in the lion's den, he began to pray, and the angel of the Lord locked the lion's jaw. That sure was a mighty day. Good Lord, sure was a mighty